Hello, you beautiful seekers, and welcome to this space and time. My name is Gabriel Lugo, and here I talk from self to self. Last week, I read this channeling from 2018, May 12th, where Quo gave us a good answer in terms of the negativity and how the creator experiments negativity. So today I want to continue with this channeling, and I'm going to read two more questions that have to do still with the evolution through densities. And I gotta warn you, I'm going to attempt to give the non-dual perspective to this, because this is exactly what Quo and anybody else who speaks from the Confederation's philosophy are trying to give us. So this non-dual perspective is the same as sixth density knowledge, because we stop seeing the universe in conflict with each other. This is the natural progression of understanding reality from the initial stages in which we believe we are separate things, and then we see the world one, but then we have an enemy who is trying to separate us, and so we are still dividing ourselves. Eventually, in the progress of expansion in consciousness, you have to reach the point which you have already bought into, which is unity, as a positive being, of course. So at this point, you really have to lay aside all polarities, because polarities are still dividing the universe, you see. So this view, this non-dual view, applies to every single philosophy, unless you want to be stuck in any of the initial stages of the creation, because this initial stages, like I said, stages bring you to a sort of polarity. Now, the most common one that I see, of course, is this idea that you, a separate self, must protect yourself from the dangers of the metaphysical world and the negative beings and all of this. This is okay. This is fine. The vast majority of people are doing this, especially in the spiritual communities. They are talking about this negative implants and transhumanism and AI and all these dangers to the self. These are people who are using the knowledge of the beginning stages of fourth density, you might say. And these are not real dangers to the self, because there is only one self. So if you buy into unity, this doesn't make any sense. There is no danger to the self, because the self is all there is. The self cannot put itself into danger. And that is just a huge misconception and a very narrow view of reality. So again, what I'm going to read has to do with distortions, and everything is inherent in the Confederation's philosophy. Or should I say that almost all that the Confederation talks about, unless it's something very specific and minute, they express always in their language the essence of unity and everything. So I want to bring that perspective to you in this episode. Okay? So we're going to pick up from where Gary asks the next question. And I remember the last question was about, let me see, because I don't remember exactly, but there's a little bridge into this. They were asking, it said the dealings of the two polarities are separate. Negative polarity being the choice, the separate. Yes, so now I remember. This is the question that kind of created the idea that is it possible that the only choice that exists in third density is that of separation? And the answer was, summarized, because if you didn't know, there's a podcast episode that you can listen to if you want to get into this question. But the question is really, is that the only choice, to be separate? Because the positive one realizes that there is unity. And so the answer pretty much was that, no, not really. I mean, you choose the path of unity, because from the moment of separation, you have no idea if you're actually separate or one. So you have to choose between the two. And the you that is choosing is, guess what? The one self, the one creator, the only self that exists. And again, I'm using non-dual language here when I say the self. I'm not referring to an ego self. I'm referring to the one and absolute self that you can check in your pure experience that you are. So again, the answer was that you do choose, and yes, there is one choice, which is the true choice. That is the positive path. And then there is the negative path. And so there we go into exploring why the negatives explore, or why the creator actually explores the negative side. I think it's a lot of fun. It's not for me, just like jumping on a bungee cord or any of that extreme stuff that I'm not really into. I think it's fun, but it's just not for me. I don't condemn it. I just think, everybody does what they want. Jumping from a high altitude plane, not my thing, but a lot of people enjoy it. Consuming psychedelics every weekend for fun, that's amazing. That's not for me either. So yeah, there are things that the creator enjoys, and that's fine. There's war and rape and abusing children and all of this stuff. That's the one creator, my friend. It's exploring everything. Now you as a separate self, as an ego, might say, oh, no way God would do that. God can do anything he wants. You do it too in your imagination. If you're horrified by this idea, don't you create characters in your imagination that suffer and that kill other monsters and poor monsters? Why would the creator do this? You are the creator. You're imagining all of these things. So you can be very creative in your own mind because you're safe. You may tell me, Gabe, I'm safe in my imagination. All my characters are safe because they're all me. Well, the same thing is happening if you think about it here in this universe. Why would you think otherwise? So, okay. I'm finally going to get into the question. And so Gary picks up from that answer that Quo gives. Again, if you want to read that answer, go listen to my previous episode. But Gary says, yes, there is another question. Thank you. We'll table Fox's second question for now and ask, is it fair to describe the journey of spiritual evolution through the densities as one of becoming less distorted? That is, distortions are removed and fall away. So before I read Quo's answer, let me give you a little bit of an introduction to the word distortion. The creation is just pure light, okay? The creation may be said to be just this perfect light. Light not as physical light, but as capital L light. Energy, some people call it. Intelligent energy and so on. All of this, everything that we see, is just a distortion of this light. So distortion is not really something bad, something you should avoid, or something you should remove, actually. Because distortion is what we are. We are a distortion of perfection. You may see that each number in the numeric line is a distortion of infinity. You see, we don't need to remove, well, we can eventually. When we have no numbers, we have infinity. When we have no distortions, then there is pure infinity. So, okay, that's what distortions are. Now let's read what Quo says. They say, I am Quo and am aware of your query, my brother. Again, we do not mean to be obscure, but we would suggest that this is true in the larger sense of removing the distortions or the qualities or facets of the being which are less reflective of the unity of the one Creator, of the radiance of the light of the one that is in the self, and the sharing of the love from the open heart, as one is able to remove the blockages through the energy centers that prohibit the free flow of the prana, or the intelligent energy through the energy centers. Then progress through the densities of creation is also accelerated in a direct ratio, shall we say. So, there is the progress in evolution of mind, body, and spirit that is enhanced as the blockages or distortions of each energy center are ameliorated and balanced, so that there is the clear reflection of the Creator's love and light as it moves through the crystallized centers of the individualized entity, seeking its own evolution. So yes, there is a removal of distortions, which are really replacements of distortions, as you will see. So yes, from one side there is the removal of certain distortions, which is, let me give you an example that will be very familiar with you. You have been calling yourself a human that has been evolving, either in the physical sense or in the mental sense. In the physical, you might even say spiritual, but I'm not going to get into that. So let's just say in the physical, you have been changing, your body has been aging, growing, diminishing, all these transformations in the physical complex. So you see your body and you say, well, I have been removing distortions, changes. The changes are the removal of all distortions, and yet there is the addition of new ones. You see, so this is what's happening. Now, you may say, well, I am no longer distorted that way. I am no longer that being. And you're right, you're not. You're a new being and you're constantly changing. So your evolution, quite right, physically has been changing, and now you're this aged individual, and you should be really proud. I actually just turned 40 and I feel really happy about being 40. It's just like an accomplishment to me. I don't know why people fear. Well, I guess it's the egotistical personality that sometimes associates, I guess, aging with death. Aging is awesome. Never felt any better. But yeah, you just feel that you have changed, that you have transformed, and you enjoy this new transformation. And so you think, yes, I have evolved. Now, mentally it's probably a little bit more relatable, because we all think, oh, I'm so much more mature. You know, I have learned things, I now have overcome all of this, and so on. So yes, quite right. You have left distortions in the past. You no longer go binge drinking, for example. I hope you don't. And if you do, that's fine too. That's the Creator also enjoying binge drinking. But you see, my point is that you have abandoned so many distortions, inclination, biases into something more whole, or what you call more whole. See, holy. And so you have changed those patterns, and now you feel much more complete. Now, this is the removal of certain distortions or blockages in the lower energy centers, and they allowed more prana. This is, of course, the mental to spiritual evolution, where you simply allow these things. And of course, you are a fabulous student of the Law of One, so you know much more about being one with the Creator and other selves. So that is changing of distortions. Now, Quo continues and says, however, in another manner or perspective, one may also see a decrease in the distortion towards unity or perfection of the balance in full energizing of each energy center, so that a different type of distortion then is the goal of removing lesser distortions. So there are distortions of one kind that are balanced and therefore removed, as distortions of a higher nature are put in place or realized because of the removal of the lesser distortions. So that paragraph summarizes exactly everything that I said about the exchange of distortions, and you may call the other ones higher distortions. That doesn't mean you are a higher being in the sense of superiority. It's just that you're a higher being in the sense of reality. You're more real than ever because you have less distortions of a separate nature. You're closer to unity in your sense of self, how you feel one with everything. So, I'm going to read the next question and then call it quits for this episode, because I don't think I can do honor to the last couple of questions in this one. So I'll leave it for the next episode. Gary says, how do we reconcile that those of the negative path advance through the densities while seeming to add more distortion to the creator? So, very perceptive, Gary, to ask about the negative path in terms of distortions, because they have been talking about, that is, quote, they've been talking about removal of distortions in the path of unity. So, how about the negative path? How do they add more distortions to the creator? And at the same time, they're getting closer to unity, right? That's the evolution of the negative path. You still get to be one with everything through the negative path. But how do we reconcile those thoughts and the idea that they go through the densities like that? Well, get ready, because we're going to explore that dark side of the creator. Dark side only from the perspective of the separate self, of course, because from unity, you just see their game, you see their spiel, even if they don't see it yet. So, let's take a look at this, shall we? Quo says, I am Quo, and I'm aware of your query, my brother. The negative path is that which attempts to use the love and the light of the one creator in the opposite sense, as does the positive path. That is, to absorb it for the self, and to use the power that comes from it in order to control or manipulate other selves and further gain personal power by this manipulation. This has been described by those of Ra as the path of that which is not. It is a path which takes that which is, unity, and fragments it into that which is not, which is separation. Beautiful paragraph. Great stop, because this is the introduction to saying that, well, let's talk about the negative path. Yes, the negative path is the same creator, okay, the same self, saying, all of this love and light is me, but only me, nothing else. Everything else is just my dominion. You can see how the Orion group leaves its footprints in history when they portray this God being. You see, when people bought into this philosophy of there is a God that is watching over us and has commandments and has laws, and you must behave this way, otherwise you go to hell. A special place that he has created, because of course he's a man, that he has created for you to suffer for eternity. You see, this is the psychopathic God, the Orion God. It's so clear, because this is the path of the negative one. But is it really a God, or is it a makeshift God? Is it a sort of fake God? Well, we're going to explore that in a bit. But you see, this is the path of the negative entity. It takes that which is, as Ra explained, right? That which is, and fragments it into that which is not. That's the path of that which is not, fragmented, separation. Because it needs to do this in order to reconcile itself with the creation. It needs to say, I am a fragment of this creation, which, of course, needs to put in order this messy, hippie, beauty, loving fragment. That's what it says. You know, and it goes on into all the densities of experience, which is not something to be afraid of, or to think it's beyond ourselves, you know, because we in third density are so vulnerable to these entities. Come on. How fragmented do you have to be to feel that way? I'm not mocking, obviously, people who feel fragmented. I'm enjoying, actually, the fact that we can feel fragmented. There is only one being, and you are it. And so your game, your drama, your all your suffering, it's just a play. It's not real. And so you realizing this is the greatest relief. It's what we call nirvana, moksha. So yeah, let's continue reading, because I'm going to extend myself. It's a very long paragraph if you're reading this channeling. So they say, however, once again, we suggest looking from a perspective where it is seen that each path involves individualized entities that seem separate from each other and seem separate from themselves. Let me make pauses in each part that I deem necessary, so I can keep adding to this visualization I want to make, because again, it's a very long paragraph and I can't just read it all and then attempt to explain every point. So okay, they say, we suggest looking from a perspective where it is seen that each path involves individualized entities that seem separate from each other and seem separate from themselves. First, this is the recognition that either path, either you're in the positive or the negative path, you're still fragmenting yourself. You see, that's why when you really want to recognize the unity of everything, you don't take a positive or a negative path. You take no path, the path that nobody walks, the path of the self, which again is not a path, it's just a state, is the natural state of the universe. It is you. But as neurotic entities that we are, especially us chimpanzees, cousins, we want to do things, so we take path, either the positive or the negative, and for that we have to individualize ourselves. I'll read it again so this makes sense to you. They say, however, once again, we suggest looking from a perspective where it is seen that each path involves individualized entities that seem separate from each other and seem separate from themselves. The first separation, they keep saying, of course, is the self from the self. Both operate within the boundaries of an illusory separation. The positive path, however, attempts to utilize the reality or the truth of unity while making its way through its own separation of self from self and self from other selves. Where have I heard all this self from the self and from self from self and self to self? I don't know. Nothing rings a bell. Anyhow, they say that the first separation, of course, is self from self. So as long as you feel an entity, as long as you feel separate, you're going to, it's not you, but it's the fractalized version of your mind that the one self is experiencing, well, that fractalized portion is going to continue to see itself separate. Now, the positive path is using, yes, the recognition that we're all one, and it uses that truth of unity to make its way back to unity. You see, it still experiences separation. It still incarnates entities or mind, body, spirit complexes. They are still at play because that's what creates the dynamics of the universe. But it's still a sort of play. It's a character that we play in the positive path still, because there's still separation. But we work with that separation towards unity. Now, the difference between the two, says Quo, of the separation of the positive path and the separation of the negative path is that those of the positive path seek to remove the separation and allow the unity that is the reality of all being to be manifest within the life pattern, while the negative path takes the separation of self from self and all other selves and attempts to capitalize upon this separation in order to continue its journey into unity with the one creator by separating from all other portions of the one creator, as though this were possible in the ultimate sense. Haha, silly negative entities, of course. That was me, by the way. Quo didn't say that. Making a pause here to emphasize that, yes, the difference between the two is that the positive path, again, seeks to remove separation and allow the unity that is, because it recognizes the unity. So it's actually questioning itself, who am I? This who am I is the question that is asked all the way to unity. Because, as you can see, our most revered sages in history have always invited us to ask the question, who are you? Forget about the world, forget about the trees and the gods and other people and catastrophes. Ask yourself, who are you? Because once you realize who you are, you say, oh gee, I have nothing to worry about. I'm actually here to enjoy my own self. This is my imagination. And so the sages, wise as they are, they say, oh, my brother, you have awakened. That is awakening. Awakening within the dream. Realizing that you are this vibrating reality. You are all of it. Not this brain which is perceiving separate portions of its own makeup. It's sensing reality. The brain is here to give us the sensation that we are alive, that we are a thing here in the universe. You see? So that is the path of the positive one. However, the negative one takes this and says, well, all of this, I'm going to capitalize on this separation. And it does it without knowing really that it can be one, or the master of the universe, which it already is, but it doesn't recognize it yet. You see, the negative one still feels separate. And so it's the same path if you think about it. Because what the negative one is trying to do is to control all of its parts. You see, because it owns people, it owns planets, it owns star systems, it owns the universe. It wants to own the universe, but it wants to own it by control. Whereas the positive one says, oh, forget about it. I am the universe. I don't need to control it because all of this is part of my imagination. And I just simply accept it and love it, whatever it is. I don't know how I'm doing it, but I'm doing it. You see, that is the positive path. The negative one, though, wants to control the universe. And guess what happens? And the next phrase is applicable to each and one of you, because I know that you are aware of this element in sixth density. But I'll explain it anyways once I read it. They finish up saying, however, as each present is aware, this is not possible past a certain level of the evolutionary process. For as the sixth density is approached and enter, the love and the light of the one creator that has been compacted by the negative entity for itself alone must be released in order that further progress can be made. For within the sixth density, the balance between love and light must be achieved in the sense that each other self is seen not only as the one creator, but is seen the same as the self, whether that self is positively or negatively oriented, for each self is each other self and the one creator. The truth of the situation of the creation of unity then must be recognized by all entities who wish to continue their journey through the sixth density into the eventual unity with the one creator. So this is the path of no return. This is the path in which once the negative entity has reached sixth density, which is the density of unity, well, how can it continue to have this thought of a separate being controlling things when the next step is to realize that it is everything, is the one creator? Well, this is the point in which it realizes that, oh, I must release this compacted energy, the thought form that I am a separate self. Everything else that I have learned is true. And I become one. So you see, one of the questions that I know happens here is some people who say, well, those negative entities, they need to come back and pay for what they have done. This is assuming that there is actually a separate self there. And so this is born out of ignorance to think that the negative entities must actually come here to third density and pay. No, they don't. All they need to do is continue to polarize themselves all the way up there. At any point, a negative entity can shift polarities. It's not likely that it does so because of metaphysics. I won't get into that. But it's still a possibility. If I remember correctly from the raw contact numbers, I think 20% of negative entities in fourth density switch polarity. Those are raw numbers, so don't quote me on that. Quote raw, not me. But yeah, so there is that possibility. They don't have to come back. There is nobody to come back. There is only a release of energy that is given to the positive path in this case. There is no, however, positive entities that turn negative unless they come to third density where the veil of forgetting is part of the experience, but I won't get into that. At any rate, the point is that the one creator experiences negativity because it can and it will. And it is the same creator. It's the same path actually of seeking unity. You see, the negative entity doesn't conform itself with, I'll just keep reincarnating here in third density and dominate a tribe or a civilization or whatever. This urge, this need for becoming one is huge, but they distort it. And instead of seeing the unity of all things, like they said here, they fragment it. They break it into pieces that they want to control and make one eventually. It's so silly, actually. Again, this is the path of ignorance. This is the path of ignoring. You see, avidya, as I have explained in my non-dual teachings. This is the path of ignoring that which is, only thing there is unity. And if you don't see it, great. Congratulate yourself, because you have so much more beauty to see. And that's all coming to you anyways. There's no reason why you would be listening to this podcast if it wasn't for that reason. And that, my friends, is how the negative entity progresses. And the negative entity polarizes and becomes the one creator. So, with this, I come to the end of this episode. I will continue with this channeling in the next episode, where we will talk about thought forms and meditation. My favorite topic, of course. So, is this the point where I say, thank you, my friends. I would like to talk to you. Yes, I would like to talk to you. There's a link in the description on YouTube where you can book a call with me, so I can see how can I help you with my teachings, because I love teaching, I love talking to people, and I love talking to you. So I thank you. Check the description in YouTube for my course, again, if you're interested. Nothing else to say. I love you, my other self, and I'll catch you on the next one.